Welcome to the Fast Performance Podcast. The Fast Performance Podcast is brought to you by Kaiser. Kaiser, powering human performance. Let me tell you guys about the impact that our Kaiser half racks, functional trainer, and our brand new A300 squat machine has already made here at Fast Performance. This equipment runs off a pneumatic resistance, and we've been able to run our baseball athletes, our lacrosse athletes, our pro wrestlers from Rocky Mountain Pro in them. And every time that they get out from under the bar, their eyes are huge. And every single one of them says, wow, that's different. I like that. That's because they're able to get consistent resistance throughout the rep. They see their power output on the screens to challenge each rep, and the versatility and variability of this equipment is unmatched. That's why we are proud partners with Kaiser and love having their equipment here at Fast Performance. In this episode of the Fast Performance Podcast, we sit down with former leader for 2nd Ranger Battalion and the current program director for tactical strength and conditioning for the National Strength and Conditioning Association, Nate Palin. Nate shares his thoughts on strength and conditioning in the tactical setting, where it came from, where it is, and what the future holds. We also dive into the balance we have as coaches to incorporate technology and when to keep it simple. We also talk about dropping the ego and knowing when to step back to allow the best guy for the job do his job. Follow Fast Performance on Facebook and Instagram at Fast Performance CO, and check out our website, fastcolorado.com. We hope you enjoy this episode with Nate Palin. 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Fast Performance Podcast. Sorry, I thought he was in charge today. No,
I'm never in charge.
We are here in the booth at Layden Street. My name is JC.
I'm Joel, and today we have with us Nate Palin.
Ooh, man, I don't even have to introduce myself. I like this already.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
And with us, of course, as always, is Scotty.
Yeah.
Scotty's in the booth managing everything and all things.
Doing production, make sure everybody looks good. We've got the high definition camera going on today.
Oh, boy.
So,
Yeah.
you know.
I can tell I look better already.
I was going to say the clown car's turned into a limo.
Yeah, no, everybody looks skinnier on this. So,
I have lost a little bit of weight recently.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Glad
you
I
look
haven't
good.
been holding my breath for nothing over here.
Exactly. So,
cool.
quick introduction. So we'll let you know a little bit more about Nate. Nate and I have known each other for how many years now? A couple, 2, 3-ish or more?
Yeah, it might be pushing 5.
Maybe 5.
It goes fast.
It does.
'Cause it's a beautiful friendship.
I know. It is a beautiful friendship. But Nate is in charge of the tactical strength conditioning program at the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So pretty cool today to have Nate actually in-house as opposed to piped in. We kind of juggled around both options. But so it's cool that you came up. Appreciate you coming today. Nate has tremendous history, obviously, looking at his bio, which includes being a leader of 2nd Ranger Battalion for 7 years prior to his transition into strength conditioning. Over the course of his 5 combat deployments in support of Operations Enduring and Iraq Freedom, Nate experienced the military's performance shortcomings and observed the need for enhanced physical training to better support mission official tasks. He began his coaching career in 2010, narrowed his focus to tactical strength conditioning, and worked as a performance specialist for Exos in Washington, D.C. in 2012, and coached Special Operations Forces at Joint Base Lewis McChord from 2015 to 2018. It seems like whenever we do these bios, they're pretty lengthy.
I'm exhausted. I think we should wrap it up.
Yeah, that's the podcast right there. boys.
Yeah. So, but what it does, obviously in kind of starting the conversation is it just speaks so highly of, your background and the position that you sit now, your wealth of experience from all angles, which is obviously, from a service perspective, which obviously we're very grateful for that right off the gate, and we appreciate, all you've done, 5 deployments, which is, amazing, and we can dig into some of those things. The stories I know you and I have told I've heard you tell offline and stuff are pretty cool, and maybe we'll get to some of those today, but we just appreciate your time. I know you got a big trip ahead of you today, so thanks for coming in.
Yeah, I figured why not add a couple hours, 24-hour road trip. Let's make it 26 and
Yeah.
start it strong.
I mean, we figured that you could only go up from here, so that way we make a pretty low barrier for you to clear. So, but I think to get started, let's talk a little bit about what's exciting. Maybe we'll start out with some low-hanging fruit, which is, the TSAC program. Talk about things that are new there. I know we just kind of had a short discussion about kind of some of the evolutions and things that are going on there, and kind of tell us, what's new with you in the TSAC department.
Yeah, so biggest focus right now is just refinement of our main initiatives. So the biggest one being what's currently called the practitioner course. We're actually changing that to the tactical strength and conditioning course. I'm a big fan of naming things what they are.
Yeah.
Practitioners tends to confuse a lot of people. So we're just going right to the strength conditioning. It's a course that you delivered for a while, so you can speak to its successes and its quality. But the biggest thing right now is the quality really comes less from the content and more from the delivery. So the folks that we have teaching it, and we know that, and we see that time and time, literally thousands of reviews now that I've read that always name, the coaches or the instructors as the main quality of the course. And so what we're trying to do is create a better platform for them. So give them a little bit more freedom of movement to operate and kind of deliver what they deliver already, without holding them down with all the NSCA isms. So it's just going to be a little bit more visually appealing, a lot more kind of program design centric, so you can, and very flexible. So when you deliver it to a specific population, you can really make that course what it needs to be for them specifically. So yeah, just giving a little bit more freedom of movement there. And then that course often leads into people signing up for the TSAC F exam.
Yeah.
With that, we're providing a better online exam prep platform. Reason being, that course itself, as you know, is not preparation for the exam, but a lot of people kind of think it is. It's a lot more focused on hands-on, practical, in-person, getting dirty coaching kind of stuff. And so with the course, when they purchase that, they'll also get that exam prep online, which is going to be a very strong green screen presentation from some of the best in the field. So your Brent Alvars, your Jay Dawes, your Joel Rathers of the world, as long as you can make that long journey down south to come record with us.
I'm always lucky with that one.
Yeah. So yeah, just bolstering those two things right now so that we can kind of build from the ground up or from the inside out and have a stronger foundation. Tyler Christensen obviously built an amazing program. My joke with him is always that he was a bulldozer. So he came in and just piled up these huge mounds of dirt. And I'm the type to kind of come in and start to sift through that dirt. So we might have leveled a couple of mounds along the way, but I think that's just part of evolving the program, evolving the process. Sure. And, but it'd be nothing without a foundation that he really put a lot of time and effort into, unbelievable.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I always tell people, just historically for myself personally was, Tyler and I worked together previously, at headquarters. We both kind of, went off and did other things, and Tyler ends up coming back. And, at that point, the program was kind of almost dormant. There wasn't much going on, and he kind of resurrected that thing and got the ship kind of, back in the right direction, and the hurdles he had to clear to kind of get to that. And then I remember him coming to me and saying, hey, this is what I want to do with this course. And he's like, and it made a lot of sense, I think, from the onset, which was him, identifying that it doesn't make sense that they're taking folks from the headquarters and always leaving, which is what we originally did, right, to go and teach the course, and then nothing was happening back at home, right? And so it was like the demand started going up, and so he identified hey, I need a team of people, right? And now you see obviously how diverse and how wide that pool of folks has come, and like you said, I agree. I look forward to, that's why I texted you the other day, because I was like, hey, are we still going to, be able to do that course coming up? Because I was really looking forward, number one, for me to learn and to coach with Hunter, because I haven't had an opportunity to do that. Hunter Sure, for those of you that maybe don't know who he is, and definitely would look him up if you have the opportunity. He's doing some great things. And but, that to me, and Adam, obviously, getting him into that mix now. But as you said, brought together, everything that kind of Tyler, dropped into your lap. And now, I think it's a natural progression that, every, 3 to 4 years or whatever, you've got to vet that and go back and say, what have we learned? What do we know that we should be doing? How are we going to evolve? And that's what you're, the process that you're in now, which is awesome. I'm excited to see that and hopefully get an opportunity to continue contributing to it, because it's, it's a lot of fun, but it's also, I think for me, it's like understanding like how far it's come, and yet now taking that and saying like, well, we still got a long ways to go, right? Like, so what do you, as you look at that, and I think in your process, like, what do you think is, what are the things that we're still trying to tack down? Like, what do you think is the next pieces in that evolution that, maybe we've identified that we still have to dig further at?
Yeah, so I'd say the two primary places are kind of on each end of it. So, one is we really need to improve the lead-in. So not just to that course, but to the tactical field in general. Mm-hmm. Right now, if you think of like collegiate athletics, pro athletics, there's kind of a natural progression that a coach follows to get into that world. Whereas right now, we're still beg, borrow, steal from those worlds, as opposed to organically growing people within tactical. Obviously, as more jobs become available, that provides some opportunity. But also with new contracts and things like that, people are starting to realize that, hey, we can't just go out, grab a contractor for X $1,000 and call it good. We need to start looking at ways to build the structure so that we give him a next step, a next level. And then once he's been there, say 7-10 years, we don't need to go find another him. We need to find somebody with just a couple of years experience to kind of segue into the field. And so starting to look at like the lifespan of a coach from beginning to end within the tactical setting, as opposed to, hey, anybody out there with, 5+ years in the collegiate world, we'd love to have you come, swing over to tactical and just assume they're good to go. Because obviously there's a huge cultural learning curve. There's also, certainly there's a performance learning curve as well, although, I always argue strength and conditioning is strength and conditioning. But so we're trying to figure out some, one, just leaning on the field in general, but two, also kind of creating, products and creating events and different things that'll help people find their way into tactical. So starting to build that network, younger, pushing a lot more programs to host internships. Also, when we can weigh in on different contracts and things like that, really push for them to have a lower level, entry point, so that they can have your very experienced coach and maybe call him the senior coach, and then you pay somebody more of a lower level salary, but you call it what it is, and you say, hey, we're going to bring in the right personality, and we're going to try to grow this person, in this performance world. So really starting to set up a continuum that's more on par with what sports has been doing forever, and it's happening. It's just happening kind of slowly. And then the other side of that entry point is that in tactical, a lot of the community still have to take care of their own. They're not going out to find coaches and that type of deal. So they're training themselves. And, everyone asks like, hey, what do you want for the TSAC-F? And I always say, well, my goal is to make it obsolete, because in a perfect world, all of these tactical athletes would be just that, and they would have coaching staffs or performance staffs to support them, and they can just worry about their skill set instead of having to take on the responsibility of also being their own coach.
Right.
But in the meantime, we do have to provide the tools for them to do that. And so, how do we do that? The individual level, the peer level, the command level, and then unit large. And that's something we're definitely working to influence right now. So that's the long-winded answer of one side of it.
Right.
The other side then is our more advanced coaches, because to your point, when this all started up, who do we really have to go to say, hey, can you come teach a course? Nobody really knew what tactical strength conditioning was yet. But now, for example, in special operations, coaches that have been there about 10 years.
Right.
And they have a ton of experience, and the collective experience that's out there is amazing. And so it's great that right now we can pull from it. We tap into it. There are instructors, there are presenters. They help build content for our courses, all that good stuff. But what are we giving back to them? I think we're at a point where the tactical conference, for example, a lot of those more senior folks, not that they don't enjoy it, love it. It's a great networking opportunity, and there is good stuff there. But they're the ones that are delivering the content now as opposed to learning. And so we need to create some higher level learning stuff for them.
Yeah.
And if that'll segue into some type of identifier to accompany a certification, something like that down the road, that's to be determined. But I would love to start pushing something along those lines. And recently, worth mentioning, Eric McMahon took over as the coaching manager at NSCA. He has phenomenal vision, and he is already executing it very aggressively. The guy's a workhorse. Heart, mind, everything in the right place. Definitely, when they hired that position, they were looking for the heart of a coach. And they found exactly that in Eric. But he's already kind of revamped the language within the RSCC so that is more conducive to the folks that are working in the tactical setting as well. So hopefully that'll be something that, they can pursue as opposed to kind of feeling, alienated as compared to, say, sports.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was going to, you brought up a good point about that in part of your last conversation. We were talking about, TSAC-F is designed to be delivered to, the facilitators that are within that unit, be it fire, police, military, wherever it is. In the sports world, we come from a background where we've been lifelong coaches. The bulk of my adult life since I left college has been involved in coaching. So a lot of those concepts come, reasonably easy to me. But then, whenever we my first delivery of the TSAC-F was with Joel down here, and it started to dawn on me at that time that I'm looking at actual tactical operators as opposed to lifelong coaches.
Absolutely.
And so getting that content to them in a way that they can absorb it and then regurgitate it and get it out in the field with limited coaching experience. Yeah. Seems to me like that's a pretty high bar. That's a big ask to get over that bar and get them to a place where they feel comfortable instructing their teams and coaching their teams and understanding the concept of cueing and coaching language and things of that nature. And I remember when you just said that, and I thought to myself, yeah, that was a big aha moment for me when I was looking at that, thinking, wow, they've got a lot of information they got to digest here.
Yep. Yeah. And that's something actually we did with the new course was every bit of content that went into it, and we salvaged a ton from the old course. It's not like it's
for sure,
a whole new world. But
sure.
What we did was we got rid of a lot of things that when we looked at it, we said, is this something we actually care that when they walk away, they know this?
Right.
And if the answer was no, then we threw it away,
got away with,
and we kept what mattered. So, I think that even though we probably, let's say we did a 25% reduction in content, I think retention is going to increase. So we're going to ask them to remember less things but do a better job with it. And there's also a ton of kind of purposeful redundancy built throughout the course and a structure within it, so that everything ties together and continues to reinforce itself throughout, that entire week, because that is a 4-day fire hose, to say the least.
Yeah. And that's the problem with all of these things, right? It's like you get so much information thrown at you, and our mutual friends Mark Verstegen and Stefan Underwood are the first ones to say, what's the Monday morning message, i.e., what do you retain from those 4 days? What are the pieces that you walk away from and say, yeah, I'm going to use this because I remember it and it's ingrained, and it's one of those things that, to your point, is redundant and is pushed, to the individual that's in that learning environment. And it's a lot of information to process, man. I mean, I see a lot of similarities in, TSAC to CSCS and some of the other modules that are out there, but then I also see pieces that are, completely different. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I retained this, but I retain this just because I do it every day. Yeah. How much of this are they actually, how much sticks?
Yep.
Yeah.
Nate, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Is there any initiative to increase exposure for the tactical setting in the university's curriculum that are teaching strength and conditioning?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. So I was actually involved about a year ago with Cal U Penn developing a online specific tactical curriculum for a grad program. And what's phenomenal about it, I mean, one, I got to be involved, so but what's phenomenal about it is that it truly is tactical specific. What I see a lot of is, hey, let's throw like 2 courses in here that have a little bit of, quote, tactical flair, delivered by people who don't really, understand this world, and call it tactical. So the 2, I know there's more, but the 2 biggest ones I've seen right now is that Cal U Penn program, which is launching this fall. I think it's going to be phenomenal. I mean, when you look at it, it's got things like load carriage, environmental extremes, marksmanship, all of these things that I always say kind of comprise the world of the tactical animal, so to speak. And then the Citadel is doing a phenomenal job there as well. They have I don't know if it's a grad degree or grad certificate program, but they're building off of that and really pushing. What's smart is they're doing it small, trying to do a good job with it before they grow it, but they're really pushing to create a program that sets some of their students up for a segue directly into tactical coaching. And like I mentioned before, kind of the issue right now is a lack of entry-level jobs, but they're doing a great job with linking people up for internships and increasing exposure and stuff like that. The problem right now, I would say, is most of that stuff comes through me in a fairly unstructured way. And so we would love to kind of organize that over time and create a better, kind of robust network, whether it's web-based or whatever it is. It's definitely been identified as a shortcoming. It's just a matter of when and how we approach it. But there's definitely an increase in that. More and more universities are creating partnerships with fire departments and military units and those type of things, so they can get in there and do a little bit of quid pro quo research wise. I'm very proud of myself for just saying that on a podcast. I feel like I nailed it.
No, you did. You did.
We'll have to check with our commander in chief, but I think that sounded pretty good.
So it's growing.
Yeah.
It's just not all that organized or elevated yet.
It's getting there.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, I actually, as you're kind of talking about that, contextually speaking, actually go back to when I was an undergrad. And to be quite honest with you, the irony behind that is even the exercise science program when I was an undergrad, which shows how old I am, it's going to when I say this, is that we really didn't have a huge bulk of strength and conditioning sport performance or performance-related curriculum. It was health, wellness interventions, fitness, the assumption that if you're going into that field, you're going to be a personal trainer. Nothing against personal training. Obviously, it's a viable and very good profession as well. But, we know the differences as we kind of start slicing that, right? And we look at that, and I go, when I came out, I had one course that was taught by the strength and conditioning coach at the university, John Larson, who's one of my mentors, that came from the Essentials textbook. And virtually, even in that, I had no clue what that actual kind of, class was being kind of directed towards until, as you're young and dumb and going, you're 20 years old going through this stuff, you don't realize it. And luckily, I had good people to go, this is another direction to go. Right. And so it kind of has some similarities or parallels to that with what you're talking about, which is, there's an infancy stage of this that has a ton of capability that still needs to be built. And I tell people this all the time, if I'm looking at my crystal ball and looking forward, well, based on what's happening in the realm of the tactical field, and you've seen the trajectory, I believe that at some point in the relative near future, the amount of availability as far as jobs and things like that is going to far surpass what happens in colleges.
Agreed.
1,000%. I mean,
without question.
Yeah, I think it's going to absolutely flip the supply-demand curve on its head even. Right
100%.
now we know we are the most overeducated profession out there, right? Everyone, I see 1 billion resumes a week, and everyone has a master's degree in this field. Right. And so to out-educate your competitions is not really possible right now. And you have people with master's degrees that are working, 40 hours. In fact, true story, over a year ago, a gentleman working 40 hours a week as an intern for collegiate football, right, unpaid, master's degree, and then 40 hours a week at a grocery store to actually make money. So this guy's plugging 80 hours a week. He did this for over a year prior to segueing into tactical, into a big Army position.
Right.
And so when Big Army finally throws down and opens up something to the tune of, conservatively, I would say around 750, aggressively, I'd say north of 2,000 jobs, probably hopefully slow rolled, but probably over the course of about 5 years.
Yep.
Everyone is going to flock to them because they're going to say, wait, I can be valued. I can work with, a population that's certainly, special. I can be part of something from the ground up. Oh, and by the way, it's Monday through Friday. 6 to 3, and I can have a life and have a family and those type of things. So the amount of interest and the gravitation right now toward the tactical world is absurd. And it would be great because hopefully it would then put pressure back on those universities, right, to start ponying up a little bit more money,
provide more,
and show some value to those coaches. I mean, they're going to have to be competitive, or they're going to lose their group. And before I forget to mention, I should also mention Oklahoma State. And Jay Dawes with the tactical program that he's building there.
Yep.
I know it's in
Would
its
you include
infancy.
Brent in that too? Is Brent Alvar kind of like?
I don't know. You might know better than me how connected he is to it, but
No, just at Point Loma.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Brent at Point Loma. I don't. They don't have the resources that Oklahoma State does in terms of the scale of it, but definitely he's doing a lot of research in the tactical world and also grooming. In fact, one of his students works right now, or former grad students, works at Fort Riley with the big Army group there. And then I had an email this morning from John, another student of his who's actually former Navy, looking to get into coaching in the tactical world.
Yeah. And, did you meet Manny?
Manny from
Romero he came through Brent also. He just finished an internship with Denver Fire here as well, and he's kind of making that transition as well. So yeah.
So I just had a Manny call last week, but different Manny.
But it's funny that you say that because I've had that conversation numerous times now, kind of going back to your point about what I think is going to end up eventually happening, and I kind of like slow roll this ball across the floor where I'm like, watch out, because guess what?
Yeah.
In all the years that I spent 10 years as a college strength and conditioning coach, and guess what? I started at that job for beans, and when I look at that now, they were happy for me to move on at that point because they knew that they could just set the clock back and bring in another. And guess what? There was 100 and some people that applied for that job, and the filter with that, and where I look at this and say, if I'm an athletic director right now, you better be paying attention, because guess what? All of a sudden, that filter of the number of people that are flooding those low-paying college jobs is going to start thinning out, because there's going to be a ton of people that go, I'm not taking that job now. And that's always been like the curse and the problem within the field of strength and conditioning, in my mind, in general, is because there's always been a massive overload of people that want to get into those jobs, and there aren't enough available. And like you said,
they don't pay that much.
And they don't pay that much.
Yeah.
And
if at all.
And I've heard athletic directors say this. They're like, well, then why do people keep applying for these jobs? Like I got people lining up to take that low-paying job, right? Well, watch out.
Yep.
Because I'm looking at that going, the boomerang's coming, and as soon as this thing continues to expand, you're going to have to either start ponying up, or you're going to start getting a lesser qualified coach, a less experienced coach, like you said. Because, I went into that first job, like you said, master's degree. All of a sudden, I'm working average. I figured during my time in college strength conditioning, I went and looked back, and I averaged almost like 55 hours a week for 10 years.
Yeah, and don't break that into an hourly wage.
Right.
You don't want to. I could have worked at McDonald's.
Well, I mean, that's always, that goes back to sport coaching in general. You get rich in the heart, not in the wallet. So I've always been a big fan of that statement, especially working for, almost 25 years for a nonprofit organization. So here's a question for the group, and sort of, see if you feel the same way, or blow it out of the water if you feel like it. But from my standpoint, for as long as I've been in this, I feel like the field of strength and conditioning, especially as it pertains to sports, and then even to the tactical market, is still, you talk about it being in its infancy. Well, the field of strength and conditioning for elite sport, you could argue is they're probably a toddler at this point. They're walking around like a drunken sailor and falling over every once in a while, but they're starting to find their way. I still find myself referring back to texts, written by Igor Vershansky, which were not that long ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then you take the tactical piece on top of that, Nate, and that is, infancy might be too high of a term to use about the evolution of that. So, you know, maybe you can speak a little bit on that and think about, like, you know, your story from your bio, for example. You were in the field, you realized that there was an opportunity. What led you to that illumination and then to sort of the evolution to where it is now?
Yeah, it's funny. I always say exactly that. This is a field in its infancy within a field in its infancy.
Right. Yeah.
Because
Okay.
Strength
All right.
conditioning is still a child.
Yeah.
I love the toddler analogy. I'm
Yeah.
stealing that forever now. You know, and then tactical within that is brand new,
Barely born.
barely born.
Okay.
You know, maybe not even yet. So, with that, exactly that. When I was, you know, a ranger, we had countless guys working harder than you have ever seen anybody work with regard to physical training.
Yeah.
But, you know, I always say, like, we were going 100 miles an hour right into the wall because we just didn't really necessarily know what we were doing. And honestly, like, just little tidbits of something that almost made sense made the biggest differences, you know, on the planet. So, for example, you know, wasn't a strong guy, was a pretty decent runner. And I had one squad leader who just happened to do a, you know, routine where we did a 100-yard sprint and a 300-yard jog, 200, 200, 300, 100, 400, walk a lap, repeat it, descending, right? Basically speed work.
Yeah.
And suddenly, literally in like 1 month, I think we did that 2 or 3 times. And in 1 month, I knocked over a minute off my 2-mile time because I had never touched anything that looked like speed work. So again, just doing something that was like a fraction of something that makes sense to us as coaches, kind of to your point earlier, all of a sudden made a mound of difference. And I didn't really think about that at the time, you know, and then I was building, for example, I'm a squad leader. So if a guy is, say, failing push-ups or struggling with push-ups, I'm going to build like a push-up improvement program for him, right?
Right.
Well, what's that going to entail? It's going to entail a buttload of volume,
Oh,
right?
that's okay.
I was going to say, are we in the nest?
It's allowed.
We can say bad words.
Yeah, we can say bad words.
We're
We're PG-13 plus.
I mean, it feels outdoorsy in here, but these are very nice microphones. So as I got out and got into really personal training was my start, and I did it as a way to make some money while I figured out what the hell I actually wanted to do with my life, right? I spent 3 years in college. I took a break in service, went to Butler University for 3 years, dropped out after junior year, not because I was struggling academically. I was crushing it, but I hated it. I didn't like marketing. I did 2 internships, one with Indiana Pacers, so sports promotion, one with a corporate real estate company, and both of those should have, you know, led me to, hey, these are great marketing, you know, opportunities. This is your future. And instead I was like, if this is my future, I'm going back in. So I went back into the military for another 3 years. Yeah. And sure as shit, 3 years later, I'm getting out with no clue still what I'm going to do. So I'm like, well, let me make some money while I figure it out.
Right.
And got into personal training as kind of the segue. Well, as I did that, I realized, wow, it goes well beyond this. This is a viable profession. You know, this is legitimate, and these concepts could be brought back to tactical.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And this is exactly what they need there. And so my goal at the time was basically, hey, ultimately, I want to be a strength coach at 2nd Ranger Battalion, you know, go back to where I grew up, or at least where I should have grown up, and bring these, you know, principles of strength and conditioning into that world. And it just so happened that was right around the time that Special Operations stood up this human performance program. Yeah. And, you know, met a gentleman that we know well, Darcy Norman, became my mentor. Yep. And kind of to your point earlier, I asked him, what do I do? I've got 3 years in marketing. Right. You know, do I like go back a few years and get on the exercise science path? And he gave me the best advice to date, which was coach your ass off. Coach, and coach.
Love it.
Yep.
Finish school however you can, get a CSCS, and then if you want to dig deeper into that side of the house, you know, you can go back and do grad school. And I followed all of that exact advice. Got very lucky, and it paid off. You know, the network side for me and my ability to get a top secret clearance kind of offset a lack of experience. But what was crazy is I applied for this gig in DC that I had no business getting in terms of looking at my resume as a coach. But because I had spent 2 years grinding as a personal trainer, running my own business, and just literally coaching, 5 a.m. was my first, and I walked out the door 9:30 p.m. Literally Monday through Saturday, right?
Yeah.
You guys know this world well.
Oh, yeah.
By fire.
So one thing I could do is I could coach. And
Right.
so, luckily they had me literally coach during my interview in D.C., and coach extremely experienced coaches, Victor Hall, Matt Devine, Paul
Yeah.
Reardon.
Yeah. There's a couple good ones.
And luckily it went well. And I got on there. But, point being, I didn't know it at the time. I knew something was missing, right? So, for example, I'm a guy who's maxing my run, every PT test, maxing my PT test, blowing it out of the water. And yet, when I was a brand new private, we went on a road march, and I'm carrying, I think on that march, somewhere around 100 pounds. I weighed about 145, 150, and had never picked up a weight in my life. So even though I'm maxing a PT test, I got absolutely destroyed on that march.
Right.
Basically woke up with a thermometer somewhere you don't want one, right? And the whole reason is because I was undersized, I was under strength.
Right.
But even then, nobody really recognized that. Nobody came in and said, hey, here's what you need to do. You need to put on some lean mass. You need to stop running so damn much and start picking up some heavy things.
Yeah.
And as soon as I started doing that, a little bit later, suddenly those ruck marches were no big deal for me and never had an issue since. So,
Right.
Again, intuitive to us in that world at the time, absolutely foreign. So it's great to see that finally these concepts are being brought back.
Well, and I think the thing that we still see a lot of within the field, based on the fact that, as you said, right, like, you've got someone who's, leading their squadron or whatever else, and they're in the mix, right? But they're in charge of PT, and they're supposed to be guiding the ship. And we still see a lot of this in those kind of like pitfalls. Is if that guy's a runner, we run a lot.
Oh yeah.
If that guy's a lifter, we lift a lot, right? And we talk about that a lot within the course. Not to go back to the course, and we don't necessarily need to, but I always say, like, we have to understand that value. We have to make sure that even those folks realize that, guess what? If you only run, you're going to fail when strength is needed.
Yep.
And if you're a strength-based person, you're going to fail when you need to get out and run. And I think that's why we can, you can get in the conversation, and inevitably it always comes up where, someone goes, oh, well, what do you think about CrossFit then, right? And I don't want to, like, pull that can open or anything like that, but I say, well, just like with anything, there's good and bad with all things, right? And my response usually to that has always been, like, you have to realize that on either end of those spectrums, you can't be clear over in this direction on one and clear down here on the other. Like, I need someone who's somewhere in the middle on both. We want to push those envelopes out, and we know through science and physiology, there's things that there are rate limiting factors, right? If I have to have a certain level of cardiovascular fitness aerobically, right? But I also am going to have anaerobic properties. Well, at some levels and things, that may have a small effect on max strength. Well, guess what? Those are the give and takes where we can't, just neglect one or the other. We have to have a pretty kind of, master of none mentality to be able to know that the skill sets and the tasks that lay out there, albeit that they're variable and, in a lot of different ways, we can't really predict them all. At any given moment, you may need them.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, and what's funny is it's not just that way with strength and conditioning in that community, right? Like, you're kind of the jack of all trades in general. So, for example, I taught guys how to shoot, right? And so I have a decent idea of what it means to be a marksman. But then we have somebody come in to teach a course who their whole life and their whole world is shooting and instructing on how to shoot. Yeah. And suddenly you are exposed to what it really means to be a master of your craft, right? Yeah. So here I am, a squad leader, used to being like the guy, and instead you have to step aside and say, okay, today I'm not the guy. The main difference is that he can come in and he can literally throw rounds down range, and everybody suddenly goes, whoa, look at, like, I can't shoot like that. I can't shoot that fast. I can't shoot that accurate, let alone combination of the two.
Right.
Whereas for whatever reason with physical training, everybody thinks they can. Right. And so they're
good at all of it, you mean?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And to your point earlier, what'll happen is, let's say Hunter Schurer walks in, right? And and clean and jerks close to 400 pounds or whatever
Small
it
trucks.
is, he'll kill me for saying pounds, but that's why I said it.
Yeah, kilos.
Yeah.
It's always kilos.
So
If you're a lifter, it's always kilos.
kilos are nice and round. It's beautiful. But,
Gotta love the metrics.
yep. But people look at that and be like, well, what's his 2 mile run time? Right away discredit him because they can start shifting it in favor of their strength or whatever
Sure.
it is.
Oh, yeah.
And so it can be a little bit more difficult to prove. But same token, if those coaches, I'm kind of changing the subject, but if those coaches are willing to put themselves in the shoes of the operator and expose themselves a little bit and go ahead and throw down like, hey, I will throw a ruck on and go 12 miles today and see what happens.
Right.
Even if successful or not in that endeavor, just the fact that they're willing to put themselves out there.
Understanding it's a huge part.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, and I think it goes back to the needs analysis piece, right? Which is the communication and all this stuff is so critical, right? Which is, I think as coaches, and like we had this conversation with Nick Winkleman the other day, it's like we get very biased in coaching, right? And it's based on us thinking we know what everyone needs, right? And that we're going to direct things downhill because this is what I think you should do. And I think the older that I get, the more that I kind of, especially in this kind of arena, I step back and I kind of go, hey, what do you think you need? Like, I need to understand more of where you think you're inefficient or inept or, maybe not performing as well as you do, because otherwise I'm just like, I'm shooting blankly, in the dark, not really knowing what it is maybe most essential for you to be better operationally. Right.
And you're bringing your inherent bias to the table. And,
Yeah.
what's funny is like when coaches first came into special operations, they all came from speed power sports, right?
Yeah.
So they brought this bias of lifting heavy, moving fast, and doing things athletically. Well, the irony was the community was more endurance-based, right? And so it actually brought them to center right where they needed to be.
Right.
But then somewhere around that like probably 3 to 5 year mark, depending how successful those coaches were, they started creating very anaerobic athletes. And it was actually a detriment. The pendulum started to swing all the way toward that speed power side, and suddenly guys, all they wanted to do was lift. And they didn't have that endurance component. And so what you've seen is this maturing, and I think, Rob Hartman talks about it kind of for himself in his own kind of self-realization was, wow, we don't really have an understanding of conditioning side of the house. And okay, how do we take these successes we've had and the successes they had before we got here,
Right.
and kind of mesh them and meet in the middle. And so what you're really seeing right now, I think, is coaches doing a better job of that, of kind of putting their bias aside, starting to engage and understand the population. I see a lot of barriers broken down with researchers, with unit commands, with so basically every level, kind of all these different silos finally starting to mesh and get on the same page. Marine Corps is doing it phenomenally with a lot of their HIT program coaches, as well as some of their coaches in different schoolhouse settings, working with West Virginia's universities, Rockefeller Science Institute, right?
Stuff they're doing.
But when they do it, they go in and they say, hey, what do you need? What do you want? Instead of bringing the researcher's agenda or bringing the strength coach's agenda.
This is what I want to show you.
Yeah, everybody's involved in that conversation. And I think the Leaders Summit kind of set the tone for some of that.
Yeah.
A few years ago that you came to, because we had people from all these different walks who started to have those conversations of like, I love doing research on X, Y, Z, but then the coach is sort of like, well, don't forget me, and then the administrator or the operator is like, well, what about us? So you start realizing like, there is a common ground here that can move the field forward for everybody.
Yeah, you made me, just to go back to that, like, talk about an inferior complex, like, sit in that room for 2 or 3 days, and, like, I'm just kind of sitting back going, what? I'm going to just kind of listen to everyone. They're like, hey, Joel, what do you think? And I'm like, I don't really want to tell anybody anything at this point. Like,
Strength is good.
Yeah, lift weights. Because it even is I always tell people this kind of from, like, say, the TSAC National Convention. I said, if you want to go into an environment where you talk about being, the qualifications of people, whatever, every year that I've been fortunate to be part of that event and present at that event, I say, I don't think I've ever felt more pressure to be on my game based on the level of intelligence and experience and knowledge that enters that room. because these folks are brilliant and they have just a breadth of experience and background and education and all these things. And that being in that room, and obviously I'm probably bringing light to that a little bit. But yeah, I think as those silos start to get broke down, then the surge of expansion and growth is going to continue, because those, as within the military, there's just always kind of been those, like, these barriers of, like, this is me, this is you, and everyone kind of is the master of their own little domains.
Yep.
And they're not going to be told what to do, and this is my job, or this is how I handle things, right? And to get people to understand that the cohesion in the collective, to be a little bit more open and to be a little bit more willing to work together for a better, goal, which is a much broader stroke of the whole thing. I always talked with coaches and all the base I've been in, I said, have you ever noticed there's kind of an army body? Like, why is that? You look at the build, and you look at the tone of, even just, their muscle and everything else. Like, well, guess what? They've all been trained in a specific way for so long, and that's starting to evolve now, right?
Yep.
Like, so it is interesting, and I think you're right. The infancy is probably a very early infancy, at this point. So what's moving kind of forward from that now, like, what do you think is most critical in the steps? I mean, from this point, like, what do you think needs the most addressing? I know, like, the ACFT is one of those pieces that was a huge kind of hurdle. I think that there's still a lot of things to be vetted there, but it's a step in the right direction, right?
Yep.
And we're seeing, some more value being put into understanding operational readiness that maybe wasn't there before, based on challenges, right? Like, how do we train thousands of people, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
literally thousands of people.
It's
And
mind-boggling.
and of course, it comes back to ultimately the economics of it, which was doing the pilots, research, which included getting the, chain of command to understand at the top level, this is how much money will be saved.
Yes.
If we influence injuries on a better level, right?
Yeah, it's not a cost, it's an investment.
Right.
And that's a conversation we have a lot, and it's crazy how much success you'll see, and yet people are still kind of scared. So, example, to segue from military, but Dina Kilpatrick's an ATC down with San Antonio Fire. She's literally had a 6-to-1 return on investment. So all of the cost of everything right? Her salary, her space, her equipment, all those things. She's still achieving a 6-to-1. Well, she would love to hire a strength coach to, one, reduce the amount of traffic coming in, because you have a preventative side of the house, right? And people training smarter. And then two, once people are post-rehab, they can move into strength and conditioning under the the watchful eye of somebody with experience and a certification. So even with that big of an ROI, she's been unable to convince San Antonio Fire to go ahead and foot the bill. And I might be oversimplifying that, I'm sure I am, but that's just a lot of what we still see is, despite the success of the programs, there's still a fear to kind of grow them and continue. Now, obviously, special operations went all in, and they went extremely aggressively. Same token, they didn't really figure out from the beginning, hey, what's the metric we're trying to move, and what are we trying to achieve here? And again, back to the bias that we talked about earlier, their assessment, is a 5-10-5 and a deadlift and a broad jump and these different things, and that was a whole bunch of coaches. And at the time, who didn't really have any experience in tactical, getting into one room and deciding, hey, this is what, and they're arguing over like high handle versus low handle trap bar, and as if it made a damn bit of difference. And what they never did was say, like, well, what does this guy actually need for his job? And not only that, that test was for, Rangers, so guys in their late teens, early 20s, who have very aggressive, physical jobs. Green Berets, who are more in their 30s, so a little bit older population. Who have still have physical component, but also a lot more cerebral type of job. And then let's say a pilot, so somebody who might be 40s, even pushing 50s, whose position is not going to be nearly as physical, or at least not in the same type of way. Yet they created one test for all of those different populations. And they just now gave freedom of movement to each of these installations or each of these different types of units to start creating their own, protocols. So that's finally kind of moving the right way. But to the ACFT, definitely tail wagging the dog. Absolutely, right? But that's the way the Army works. And you need to have that test out there because you need to hold somebody to a standard. On that topic, I was fortunate enough to speak at the Secretary of Defense at a close combat lethality task force. One component of that was physical training. Whole bunch of experts in the room. We had a bunch of presenters, and then over the course of a couple days, basically like think tank, right? So we're in rooms writing all over the walls. There's people kind of mediating the whole process, and then it all filtered into sort of this presentable piece that they took to the Secretary of Defense to say, here's what to prioritize, right? Well,
Right.
I was fortunate, sort of, in that I didn't miss a flight. I said that recently, but I didn't miss a flight. The flight was canceled due to weather. Go figure, out of here, right? In February. And so instead of speaking day one, I think I spoke late day two or end of day two. And so Paul Goldberg was there, Tyler Christensen was there, and they were literally texting me the whole time of everything that was being presented, what was right with it, what was wrong with it, right?
Yeah.
And there's a ton of high tech, right? So people up there saying, oh, we have this and this fancy science, this fancy technology, millions of dollars, this is what you're missing, this is what you need. We need to monitor people 24/7, yada, yada. And I kind of came in there, and I think for some people, I gave them the sigh of relief, and for some, I really disappointed them because I said the solution is free. The solution is your policies, right? The fact that everyone has to train at 6 a.m. at the same time and we don't have space for it. The fact that you say, hey, when we do roll out strength coaches, we're going to give one to everybody because that's fair, instead of saying, let's prioritize the units that truly need, more of a aggressive physical approach first. And so I just said, hey, here's the reality of it. It's not a money problem.
Right.
Right.
No,
it's definitely not a money problem.
No.
Right.
We all know what perfect looks like.
Yeah.
And it's great to build up the ideal, but you got to look at where you're at, and there's a big discrepancy between where you're at and where you're trying to go. So if you want to talk about, scaling this, right? There's two ways to do it. I see one is you make a small impact, but you do it across the board. So you looked at kind of that collective win. Or you go deep, but you keep it narrow. So in other words, let's put every asset into special operations and let's start there.
Yeah.
It's a scatter plot.
Yep.
Scatter plot versus being surgical.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is. I definitely think that you kind of start. You build your perfect model within special operations, which is kind of what they're doing.
Yeah.
But then as you look to go beyond that, you have to look at what's the minimal pieces of that we can use to have the most amount of impact.
Well, I think maybe even, as you're saying that, my mind automatically goes to, thinking back and there's a really close parallel potentially where you say we have a high school strength coach, a college strength coach, and a professional level strength coach, a similar kind of level where it's someone that comes into basic Army, guess what? They're going to get the guy who's at a high school level, right? And you work your way through into the most specialized and most elite level in terms of that being a filter of, where's your scalability, as you said, and the importance of, who needs what. And yeah, you, like you said, prioritize into and doesn't cost money. It just requires a plan that's in place and allocating it into where you think, is going to be the most beneficial right out of the gate. And then you learn from that and you grow from that. And then you start adding in pieces as opposed to, just saying let's just go, standard approach, ready, shoot, aim.
Yep.
And and all of a sudden you go, and we've already seen that happen, right? I mean, that was a huge early backlash within kind of the start of employing folks in the military in some of these positions. Was they did that and then went, we screwed all that up, right? The filters were wrong, the hiring process was kind of flawed, and there was all these things that went into it, and they said, let's scrap that. And then all these people lost jobs and they started over, right? And it's those are growing pains within it. As more than probably anybody, those are the challenges dealing in these scenarios, and it makes it difficult to always get it right. But I think we're getting closer.
Well, any year I get, the one thing I always say is give it time, right? Because my fear is, let's say Big Army comes out and says 2,000 coaches, go. And they give it 3 years.
Right.
Hell, even 5 years, even 10 years. Like that's not, it's going to take 3 years just to sift some of the trash that you hired out and start to figure things out, right? Like it took special operations 10 years, and honestly, some units are in a great place, and some still haven't made it there because of, various turnover with the staff or with commanders, et cetera. So there's a huge, learning component to this. And so, my thought is they have to come out and say, we are going to commit to no shit 20 years. And here is the one metric that we actually care about. And let's just measure that instead of let's measure 20 things that don't actually matter. Like, what's the one thing you actually care about? Let's focus on and influence that.
Yeah.
I have you brought up an interesting point earlier when you were talking about the tech, and how much tech that a lot of these that the military has to dedicate to this. I know from the strength and conditioning world, I mean, it's real easy for us to get out-teched with sexy equipment. It happens all the time. Somebody's coming out with some hot new thing that your athletes have to use because it's going to make them better. And Joel and Scotty have heard me say this on multiple times. That's a piece of fine-tuning equipment. That's a 1%er right there. That's something that, why fine-tune the plane when the pilot can't fly it straight?
Yep.
So have you been, knowing that you're up against something that's even harder to hurdle, which is military contracts, right? What kind of language or opinion or nomenclature would you use to get somebody to understand basic is good, basic works, lift, run, whatever it may be? You don't need a lot of expensive equipment to pull this piece off.
Yeah, I mean, I always try to use myself as an example when I can, just because they tend to listen a little bit when I pull from that military background. But a great example, hell, is my brother. Poor guy that I'm going to talk about this, but right, kid. So he's a Ranger was, and is currently an instructor at the mortar school at Fort Benning. That's where I'm heading after this. And I want to say his deadlift on the ACFT was something like 235 for 3.
Uh-oh.
Right? And
so he's not going to like you divulge that.
What kind of tech would you use, right, to get his deadlift maybe a little closer to what we think it should be, right? And so it's so unnecessary. And to me, you wait. You earn the right to use that kind of stuff. Even at first group, we used tech a good amount, but it was more just as a way to kind of make training more appealing and fun and different, and as coaches to challenge ourselves.
Of course.
But, great example, Hunter Schur up there, he gets more out of less than any coach I've ever seen because he has incredible relationships with the guys.
Sure.
They trust him, right? And he figures out programming that actually fits the pulse of the unit as opposed to Hunter's agenda. And so just an example of how absolutely unnecessary it is. Usually what I reference is the Battlefield Airmen Group where Tyler is, right?
Yeah.
So I forget what their budget is, but it's an absurd $1 million amount. Right? And they monitor something like 380 maybe data points a day per person, something along those lines. But it's absurd, right? Like it's
off the charts.
Wake up, pee on a stick, We monitored your sleep. We're now going to monitor everywhere you move throughout the day, not just during training, et cetera. And you've created the Utopia, right? But my joke is always like, give me 20% of that budget, and I'll get you 80% of those results.
Right.
Because it's not all that fancy high-tech crap that's doing it. It's just the fact that you're driving awareness on things that they're previously were under the radar.
Right.
Like you say, sleep matters. Movement quality matters. Nutrition matters. Not even periodization, but just the idea of altering intensities and volumes, like simple as that, matters. And so you kind of talk about, hey, at the end of the day, what do you actually care that or your Monday morning example with Stefan, like what do they actually care about? What do they actually need to take away from this? And it's those small, simple pieces that are gonna have the biggest effect. So that education component is
gigantic.
Huge.
Well, and I mean, I think part of that from the tech side too is, to a certain extent, I'm sure that I'm making this up, so correct me if I'm wrong, but they are testing to a certain extent battlefield readiness, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess, the question would be, if you have a member of a special ops team that is low on the battle readiness scale, are they not going to go? Are they not going to go in because they got measured that way? I mean, an example that we used was, a lot of HRV stuff that had been pushed on us for a long time up in Vail with our elite winter sport athletes, our Olympian and World Cup and X Games athletes. And, just because they would score low on an HRV, well, they got a comp coming up. Yep. Guess what? They're going. It has nothing in our minds. Sure, we could measure the readiness scale, but we're not gonna take the thoroughbred and pull it back in the racehorse at the Kentucky Derby on Derby Day. You know what I mean? So it is one of those things that's like a odd balance that you have to hit where you can easily out-tech yourself with that stuff.
As Major Bigham says, the enemy has a vote.
Right.
So like he's not gonna wait until you've got good sleep. And let me just let you finish up your macros there, and then it seems to be a good time. So you have to account for reality. The other thing is we don't necessarily know the baseline of what it means, the profile of success for an operator yet.
Sure.
To start saying, okay, you have to hit these marks. So to the point of low-hanging fruit, right? Like, what we do know is a 235 deadlift for a guy in his mid-30s is inadequate, right? And so it's finding those obvious minimums and then bringing those minimums up. And we all obsess even with the maximums, for example. I mean, if I were to build an ACFT, it would have one number, and that's the number you have to hit. Yeah. And once you've hit that, I don't really care because I've determined that is strong enough. That is fast enough. That is fit enough.
Right.
As opposed to kind of chasing these maxes.
That's the baseline level that you as a leader would say, okay, they've hit the mark. I know that I'm confident with them going into battle.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And we know, too, like, there's going to be people who absolutely break the mold, right? Like,
of course.
One of the best Rangers I ever knew probably weighed 130 pounds. And I saw him, take multiple people's packs, throw them on his back, take the mortar, take rounds, and just hump through mountains like nobody's business. And I guarantee his deadlift didn't even touch 200 pounds.
Right, but he just had a bigger motor.
He just, and mentality, right, is a huge component of it. God, so, even Battlefield Airmen Group, they're really dialing in the physical side of the house. Mm. And again, because the other thing to consider is, like, where's everybody really starting? So how good do you really need to make, like, how good does a program need to be to improve physicality in these environments?
Sure.
The truth is training age is still low, at least in the way we think about, strength and conditioning as a well-rounded concept. And so they're just tapping into the cognitive side of the house.
Right.
The fear is when you start disqualifying people because of certain components, right? Are you going to miss somebody who could have been really good because they didn't fit this predetermined mold?
Yeah. But it depends on what that predetermined mold is and or how far that system is going to dig.
Yep.
I mean, how far down the hole are you going to look, to see what the heck's going on?
But I think that goes along all lines, though, too.
True.
We know that. Like, we had this conversation on the sport-related side where we talked about a super high performer as a lacrosse player. He actually came to one of our training camps, kind of made the team. We ended up cutting him, and he's an absolute freak. Well, there's always going to be those instances, right? Like, it's always going to be a system that is never going to be perfect.
Are you talking about Newman?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's playing at the ultimate pro level in the Premier Lacrosse League and was an all-star. But how do you know? Like, when he came into their system, he was low level. And now all of a sudden he's just exploded. So to your point, you don't really know.
Yeah. Has the fastest shot in the lacrosse.
Yeah. What is it, 115?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The difference, too, is in sport you have the field of play, right?
Sure.
So, like, if you're nobody in the weight room, it doesn't matter if you can showcase on the field.
Mm.
Where in tactical,
that's different.
At what point do they get to the, quote, field of play, and then what does that look like, and how do you even measure, success there? Like,
Yeah.
And that's always a tough area, especially with strength conditioning. I always say, like, let's focus on what we know best.
Sure.
And then let them figure out how to apply it to what they do. You know, and I think who starts to cross the line a little bit in a good way is going to be some of your cognitive performance folks, because they can start kind of saying, okay, here's some of the components of cognitive performance, and here's how they support what you do literally, you know, in the shoot house or on the range. Whereas for us, we're just dealing with raw physical components.
Sure.
And so let's make our impact there. Yes, it gives them a better physical platform on which to display their skills. That's our whole goal. But you know, the guy with the biggest deadlift is not going to be the best shooter because he has the biggest deadlift.
Right.
There's going to be a relationship there, but it's fairly far removed.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
so we got a fun thing. I'll do this because you've been doing them every day.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take the reins on this one, Nate. We finish up each one of our podcast webcasts with a cool little thing we call the Fast Five.
Oh boy!
And this is all F words, clean. F words.
I was going to say
because I'm sure you could. We could all. I'm sure we could all throw out a few, but it's basically, you know, first thing that pops in your head kind of ideas, and well, here we go. So let's talk about.
My heart is racing right now.
Yeah, fun. What do you do for fun when you're not in the tactical world?
Really getting into mountain biking now that I'm here in Colorado. In fact, that really got kicking off at Mountain Con.
There we go.
Last year. So
Right.
we broke into two groups. One was supposed to be the advanced and one the less advanced.
Yeah.
It turned into the guys group and the girls group, and I was the guy anchoring the girls group. And by anchoring, I mean they were dragging me up the mountain.
is that weirdo still back there?
Oh God! Why is it? Oh, he is. I can hear him breathing. Yeah. So
I didn't know you could put training wheels on a mountain bike.
What's great is I'm pretty decent on the downhill because I don't have any sense.
Yeah.
So my friend
Is that
tells
where you caught
me,
back up?
Yeah. My friend says your enthusiasm outweighs your ability.
There you go.
I think that's good. So.
That's all that matters.
I love it.
So yeah, a lot of mountain biking lately.
Good.
There we
good.
go.
Favorite food?
Ooh, all things Italian for sure. I grew up just a little bit upstate New York.
There you go.
Good buddy of mine, Anthony Cardoso, actually went to the Culinary Institute of America there and started his own bakery, and his parents have an Italian and Portuguese restaurant.
Oh.
And oh gosh,
That sounds
I'm
amazing.
Drooling
Salivating
right now. Yeah, his post on Instagram. Oh man,
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay. Best fictional character.
Ooh, I am
a new one.
not into fiction, so that's
Okay. It could be TV, it could be a book, it could be anything. Who's the best?
Superhero.
Yeah, superhero, you name it.
yeah. I probably would go the the superhero route and the Hulk.
I like
Ferrigno,
it.
of
I
course.
like it.
Yeah.
Ferrigno's
Yeah,
Hulk.
the original. The
Yeah,
original.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, that's good. That's 3. Let's
3,
do the funniest moment in your career.
Oh, this is easy. We're bringing Mountain Con again. Last year at Mountain Con, you guys know this. I was demonstrating some core stuff, and I think a little bit of the bruise from the night before hit me, and some leaked out. And I'm just gonna say I owned it.
Oh, he
no
did.
problem. Didn't skip a beat, and I thank my rangering days because nothing. I mean, stay humble. Stay humble.
Didn't even
amazing.
pause and just, oh my God, it was absolutely, that was the most pro handling of that particular moment I think I've ever witnessed in my career, and kudos to you on that one.
That's why I'm getting future speaking.
No, you're on the list already, so that's all that.
Awesome. Glad I can make that happen.
Yeah.
Without that, I wouldn't have an embarrassing moment. So.
Yeah. There's just one.
Just one.
That's the only one.
Last one, outside of the tactical world, your favorite athlete to watch?
Ooh, boy, to watch. Still current or?
Could be former, could be current, could be you name it.
Yeah, former, and maybe just because of the current ESPN, but Michael Jordan.
Yeah,
just the effortless fluidity with which he achieved great things. I know that people since are building on that and taking it to an incredible level. Obviously, you have the Kobes and the LeBrons, et cetera.
Right.
But to me, it's the effortlessness with which he did it that just absolutely amazes me.
Yeah. I mean, say what you want about our present state in the U.S. with us all being on lockdown, but ESPN was pure genius to crank that out during this period because it's really brought me back to those days watching it when I was a kid growing up and just going, oh my God, who the hell is this guy? Yeah. And same thing, you watch that versus like some of the top players today where, LeBron's kind of a bull in a china shop. He'll go to the rack and he'll mow you over and he's got no problem with that. And he has moments that look effortless, but every aspect of MJ's game, he made it look so easy and fluid, and right on that one.
Yeah, it's been cool for me. Obviously I was a very young kid. I don't mean to age you guys, but like, obviously there's the references to those like monumental games, and those references, but now you get to see the full story behind it, and you're just like, wow.
Yeah, it makes it that much better.
Something else, man.
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Nate, it has been an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much for your service. Thank you for what you're doing with the NSCA and, taking this program that is, still a newborn baby and evolving it into, something that's going to be really special. I mean, the best way I could put it is your country thanks you for what you're doing right now and what you have done in the past. And obviously Fast Performance is really looking forward to being a part of this evolution as well and helping you guys achieve all those goals.
Well, definitely appreciate your involvement. Thank you so much for having me up here. This is actually my first, step outside of the family since this thing kicked off. So I appreciate the microphones being exactly 6 feet apart.
Just for those watching at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But no, honestly, it's been my pleasure, both time and service, and then now getting to continue to give back to those that are still doing it. I know. I appreciate the mention of 5 deployments, but plenty of friends with, 14 plus that are still out there churning. So, lots of love for all of them and those that sacrificed. And it's cool that we can talk about the latest tech and gadget and strength conditioning and that kind of stuff, and worry about those first world problems. So,
Gotcha.
For sure.
Well, thanks. And thanks for everybody for tuning in to today's podcast.
All right. Thanks again for joining us on today's Fast Performance Podcast. We appreciate Nate sitting down with us and sharing his valuable insight as well as perspective on all the things going on in the tactical realm with regard to strength conditioning. We ask that you like this episode as well as subscribe to our page, and also encourage you to share your comments in the comment section below, as we value your opinion and hope to continue to bring you the best information from the best leaders in the field. Until next time, we look forward to seeing you again, and we appreciate you tuning in.